Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. This is gonna be my September wrap up, so all the books that I read back in September, which was a little bit over 40 books. So a really great reading month for me, and compared to like August, it was a lot better. So let's just jump into the many books, the romances that I read in September. The first book that I read was Oopsie Daisy by Chelsea Edwards, which I gave 4 stars to. I don't really know how to categorize this one because it's technically a historical romance, but it is set in the 1970s, so like a modern historical romance or a contemporary historical romance. Like, it's not too long ago, but it is a new adult college romance set in a historically black university. It's about Daisy and Trevor, who were in the Winston Brothers series by Penny Reid. This book is set in that same world. It's about how they first met in college, how they first fell in love before they ever became Simone's parents. Simone is the heroine from Dr. Strangebeard, which is Winston Brother book 5. So Daisy is a wealthy family, but going into college, she hides her last name, she hides who her family is in order to fit in. Trevor is definitely not from a wealthy family. He grew up pretty poor and he has no idea who Simone is, and it's a fairly slow burn romance, and the book does have a bit of emphasis on the school, on the setting of the 1970s. There is a bit of drama with, of course, Daisy hiding her identity, and there's also drama with Trevor being in a fake relationship, not with the heroine but with his other friend. Like, he is that friend's beard. But overall, I did really like the romance. It's very slow paced. Both Trevor and Daisy were great, and I just really liked reading about a setting that I had never read about before and I definitely wasn't there for. I then read Muse by Katie Evans. For some reason back in September I was really missing Katie Evans and her books, so I did a little reread of her older stuff like Real, the Real series, and the Man Whore series, which are 2 of my favorite series. And then I also ended up reading Muse, which was the only book that I still hadn't read from her. I gave it 3 stars. It was okay. Most of her more recent stuff are only okay for me. It's a really short and quick read about 2 people who are stuck in JFK in the airport because they missed their flight to Texas. So Becca and Noah have 16 hours to do whatever they want, and Noah wants to spend it in bed, but Becca makes him work for it a little bit. It is a really short book, so the pacing is very fast and there's not much time for character development or plot development either. I mean, they fall in love in the course of these 16 hours, but still it is a fairly cute read. They get up to some fun things during those 16 hours, but yeah, it was just like an average read for me. I also read a very highly anticipated book of September, which was Saint by Sierra Simone, but I am so sad I didn't love it like I wanted to. This is book 3 in her Priest series, and it's the first romance in the series. I loved Priest, I especially loved Sinner, but Saint was a 3-star read for me. I was a little disappointed by it. It's a second chance romance between Aiden and Elijah. It's been 5 years since they broke up, since Aiden left to become a monk. Elijah is now engaged and wants to write this article about the monks, about the beer that they brew, so now Elijah and Aiden are kind of back together, at least like physically. They're in some close proximity, but the romance is so slow. Not much really happens in this book. There's just a lot of introspective stuff, lots of talk about the monks and religion, and I just didn't really care about it. Like in the first 2 books, there's a good balance of religion and romance, but here it was just so heavily religious that I just kind of checked out and wasn't invested in anything. I also really wish we got more of Elijah's point of view. We only get like a couple chapters in his point of view through his articles, but I wanted a little bit more just to get a better sense of his character, so this one sadly was just 3 stars for me. I read How Sweet It Is by Dylan Newton, which is a cute opposites attract romance between an event planner who creates happily ever afters for people and a hero who writes horror. I gave this one 3 stars. It was okay. It did have a promising start. Like Drake, the hero, the author, he is experiencing writer's block and he ends up finding inspiration in Kate, the heroine. She kind of becomes his muse when he starts writing a romance. I think it's a historical romance. So that part was really cute, but the more I read, the more I just wasn't really connecting with the story or the characters. The romance was a little bland and the hero does a huge dick move at the end that he definitely needed to grovel more for. On paper, this one sounded really good, like she is the queen of romance and he's the king of horror, but the execution wasn't too great. My next book was another slightly disappointing read. It was The Viscount Made Me Do It by Diana Quincy, which I gave 3 stars to. This is the standalone sequel to Her Night with the Duke, which I really enjoyed, but this one was a bit of a letdown. I just did not really like the hero here. Griff was really intriguing in book 1, but here he just fell so flat. I did really like the heroine Hannah though. She is a bone setter. She's an Arab bone setter who helps relieve people's pain, which is how she first meets Griff because he has chronic pain from his time in war. But Griff also does meet her for some other motives because he's been investigating his parents' murder for a very long time, and he finally gets another clue, which is through Hannah. So there's a slight mystery aspect with the murder, but that part was just really dragged out and I wasn't all that interested in it. The romance did start off really great though. I was really liking it, but it went downhill when Griff becomes engaged, or like fakes being engaged, to his best friend who is not the heroine. So he gets engaged to save that friend's reputation even while he's falling in love with Hannah, with the heroine, and I just wasn't a fan of that. Mainly because that part went on for so long. Like, he's engaged up until almost the end of the book. I then binged the Hades series by Tate James. I read all 4 books. Book 1 is Seventh Circle, book 2 is Anarchy, book 3 is Club 22, and book 4 is Timber. If you saw my reverse harem video, you probably know that I really like the Madison Kate series. I had a really fun time reading that, so I was so excited to read like a spin-off series, but I did want to wait until all the books were out, and I was finally able to read the whole series last month. The series overall is like 4 stars for me. I gave each book 4 stars except the last book, which I gave 3.5 stars. It's a dark new adult reverse harem romance that is kind of mafia slash biker. Hades, the heroine, she runs her town kind of like a mafia boss or a biker boss. We have our 3 heroes. Lucas, who is the baby. He's the youngest. He's 18 and he is a total sweetheart. He's my favorite of the 3 guys. There is Zed, who is Hades's best friend and second in command, and his romance with Hades is definitely the slowest because of that friendship, and they don't want to do anything to jeopardize it. And the 3rd guy is Cass, who is this older grumpy biker from another gang. So like Madison Kate, I really liked how each of the individual romances developed at their own pace. I love that each guy had his own distinct personality, and when they started becoming friends, the banter was so good. The main series conflict is that Hades's ex is out to kill her, so there's a lot of action and suspense throughout the whole series. I did say that the last book I gave 3.5 stars to, which was the lowest rating for me. Even though I did like it, it was the weakest book in the series for me. Like, I did like the way that it ended, but there's a lot of things that were a little bit unsatisfying for me for a final book. It felt anticlimactic, and there's also so many dark things that happen in that final book. Like, Hades goes through so much dark shit. Like, there's rape and torture and just all these sorts of awful things that happened to her. But overall, for a series, it was really entertaining. I think I might like Madison Kate just a little bit more, but it was still really good. I finished the series in a couple days, and we are getting another spin-off about the Guild, which I am so excited about. I read a vampire romance next, 7 Sins of Snow by Loxley Savage, which unfortunately I didn't like. I gave it 2 stars. The concept of this one sounded amazing, but the execution was awful. It's 500 pages and it was 200 pages too long. I ended up skimming so much of this book because it was just so long and so much of it was unnecessary. There's a lot of gratuitous sex and violence that if you took all of it out, you would have the exact same story, but just at a reasonable like 300 pages. I really wanted to like this one. It's a vampire retelling of Snow White, and it's a reverse harem romance with the 7 vampires. The heroine Snow is being tortured by the evil queen, and it goes on for so long. Like, I want to say 100 to 200 pages. It was just Snow being tortured, and After 50 pages, I was pretty much done. After that, it got so boring to read. And then she finds out that vampires exist in her world. She ends up meeting the 7 vampire leaders or whatever. They're all super interchangeable. I don't even remember any of their names. They were so forgettable. So the rest of the book after 200 pages is basically just sex. There is barely any plot. Snow is supposed to take down the evil queen, but she doesn't really do anything but have sex with her vampires. And also the writing wasn't the best. This author definitely needed an editor, or at least a better editor, because this book did not need to be 500 pages long. I then read Liar by Fiona Cole, which I sadly did not love. It was my least favorite of the series, of the Voyeur series. It's a standalone though. You can read it fine as a standalone, but it's set in that same world. I really wanted to like this one, not just because I do enjoy the series, but it's also got the age gap trope. There's a forbidden romance between the younger heroine and her uncle's best friend. They had one night together before they met a couple years later and found out like their relationship to each other. And once they do reunite, they kind of fall back into bed really quickly, and the book was just a little too short for me. There just wasn't enough development for the romance, and I didn't really connect with the characters either. Like, I just didn't see why they fell for each other outside of the bedroom, so this one was sadly not that great. I read another historical romance, The Devil and the Heiress by Harper St. George. This is the standalone sequel to The Heiress Gets a Duke, and I give this one 4 stars. I liked it slightly more than book 1. It's about the younger Crenshaw sister, Violet, who wants to become a published author, but her parents are forcing her to marry someone she doesn't want to, so she runs away, and along the way she ends up picking up the hero. Christian is an earl, and he actually has his own motives for running into Violet that same night. He wants to marry her because she has money, her family has money, in order to save his earldom. So they're kind of traveling together, slightly road trip like, and Christian does end up falling for Violet genuinely, so he's kind of torn between saving his estate and being with Violet. I just really like these two characters. I love the way they were with each other. There's lots of great banter, and it was so great how hard Christian fell for Violet. It was really great, and I am now very excited for Violet's older brother's book, which is up next. I read Evil Twin by Katie Wilde, which is a fantasy romance novella, which I gave 4 stars to. It's been a while since I last read Katie Wilde, but I do love her stuff, and I've missed reading some of her books. This one was great. I think it's set in the same fantasy world that she's written her other fantasy novellas. We have a hero who is a twin and a virgin. He is younger by minutes, so his older brother is the one who is king, but his older brother is kind of awful, and Bane is definitely the one who deserves to be king. Like, he would be the better king for their people. So Bane does some plotting, and he decides to trick his brother's fiance. He plans to sleep with her in order to get her kingdom because she's like the princess, but it turns out the woman that he thought was the brother's fiance is instead the brother's fiance's sister, who is also doing some plotting of her own. So now they both work together to take the thrones for themselves, and it's very short and very steamy, and I had a lot of fun reading it. I then read The Jezebel by Dylan Allen, which is the final book in the Rivers Wild series. I gave it 4 stars. I really liked it. I like that it was an age gap romance with an older heroine. Like, they knew each other when she was 18 and he was 10, and she kind of helped him through his rough time back then. Now, almost 20 years later, they reunite, and the chemistry is on fire between them. But Reagan is married with children, though she does want a divorce from her husband because he's a cheater, and she's been trying to get custody of her kids, but he's been making it very difficult. There's a lot of drama like the first 2 books, a lot of family secrets that are revealed. The romance is really sweet. Like, Stone is just totally head over heels for Reagan and has been since he was 10. I give it 4 stars. I really liked it. I really like the series overall. It's like a family saga about these 2 families that are very intertwined. It gets very dramatic and angsty, but if you like family-oriented series, you should definitely try this one. I finally read another Rachel Reed book. I read Common Goal, which is book 4 in the Game Changer series, her MM hockey romance series. I give this one 3.5 stars. It was not too bad, definitely not my favorite in the series, but it is still enjoyable. It's an age gap romance between an older hockey player hero and a younger bartender. It's like a friends with benefits romance. Eric, who is the goalie, the older guy, he has only recently been able to be public about his attraction to men. He starts this friends with benefits thing with Kyle, and of course feelings start to develop, but both of them are very hesitant about putting their emotions out there. The romance is a little slow. Both of them don't think that they're good enough for the other person, which is why I couldn't really give this one a full 4 stars, but overall it was still a pretty sweet and steamy romance. I then read another highly anticipated read of the month, of the year, which is The Legacy by Elle Kennedy. If you've watched my Elle Kennedy ranking video, you might know my thoughts already, but I did like this one. I gave it 4 stars. I did expect to give it 5 stars, but I wasn't really happy about one of the stories. So we're back with the 4 couples from the off-campus series. We get like an epilogue novella for all 4 couples. It's set like a couple years after the end of the off-campus series, and it's very baby and marriage centered. My favorite was Logan and Grace. I mean, they're my favorite couple of the series, so I'm not too surprised about this. And the most disappointing one for me, my least favorite, was surprisingly Garrett and Hannah's story. I just really wasn't a fan of what happened in this book, both with like the secrets being held and how Garrett dealt with his dad. It was kind of all just annoying to read, and I was not happy with it. But the other 2 novellas, Dean and Allie, Sabrina and Tucker, those were fun. So overall, I still did like this book. I then read and finished another series this month. I've been reading a lot of series. I am a series binger. I read the Cinderella trilogy by Webster. So I read Stroke of Midnight, Prince Charming, and The Glass Slipper. I had an amazing time reading the series. I gave all the books in the series 4 stars. The book 1 might be 4.5. It might be my favorite of the series, but it was so good. It's like a smutty, slightly dark Cinderella retelling. I finished the series in 2 to 3 days. I could not stop reading. It's got an age gap, a filthy rich hero, and there is a sugar daddy element in this book. The heroine Ash needs money for college because her father has stolen her whole college fund. She ends up meeting Winston, who is our hero, who is twice the heroine's age. He's like the CEO billionaire, and he kind of becomes her sugar daddy. He pays her a lot of money to do stuff for him. Most of it is sexual, though it doesn't always mean sex. It gets really kinky and hot. I mean, it is Webster. The series is also slightly mafia adjacent, which was really interesting, but I really like this romance. I like that Winston, he is such a jerk, but you can see him slowly grow to be obsessed with Ash, falling in love with her. Ash, or Cinderella, is dealing a lot of awful things with her stepbrothers and her stepmother, but she's a really strong heroine who I enjoyed reading. It was a really entertaining series. I had a lot of fun with it, and we are getting a spin-off next year about the step-siblings, about the triplets, the terror triplets who were Ash's evil stepbrothers. I honestly am slightly terrified of what kind of romance their book will be because they are awful in this series, but I am still 100% reading it. I read a novella next. It's a slightly smutty novella. It is Being Hospitable by Mika James. I gave this one 4 stars. It's a very solid FF novella. It's quick and hot. The heroine's new roommate is her best friend's younger sister. There's some really good chemistry between them, and I mean, it was so short. The audiobook was 2 hours, so I flew through it. Next, I read The Day I Stopped Falling for Jerks by Max Monroe. This is the first book in a duet about a girl who falls for her best friend's brother. It was okay. I give it 3 stars. I didn't really get that much from the romance, and the hero didn't show up as often as I wanted him to. Lucky, the heroine flies to Australia to cover this surfing competition, which is where she meets the hero, Ollie, who is one of those surfers. And Ollie, you guessed it, is a jerk. I mean, I feel like it's your fairly typical jerk hero romance. It wasn't anything too special about the romance, but I did like the actual setup of the writing because it's written like a podcast. The heroine owns this podcast and she talks about like her previous relationships, and the book is told in this podcast form. But sadly, I just didn't love the main character, so I didn't love the romance, and I had a hard time getting into it. I then read 3 Monica Murphy books, 3 books in her dating series, books 3 3, 4, and 5. Book 3 is Holiday, which I gave 4 stars to, and it was a super cute Christmas romance. And yes, I read a Christmas romance in September. It's a really cute grumpy sunshine romance where he hates Christmas even though he sells Christmas trees, and she loves Christmas. The heroine Candace gets roped in by the hero's mom to get Charlie to attend all these holiday events that he really doesn't want to go to because she's like a PR person and he is the grumpiest grump, but the romance is so sweet. It's pretty much a Hallmark movie, a Christmas Hallmark movie in book form. There is barely any steam, which I was a little disappointed by because the other books in the series did have steam, but still, if you're in the mood for a fluffy, light holiday romance, I highly recommend this one. Book 4 in the series is Hate to Date You, which I gave 3 stars to. It's probably my least favorite of the series so far. It's about the heroine's brother from book 1. It's also a best friend's brother romance, so Stella is best friends with Carter's sister. It's also got the roommates trope, so there's a lot of good tropes here, but I just didn't really fall in love with any of it. Carter and Stella hooked up one night, and after he snuck out, they never talked again, but now he's back in town and he needs a place to stay, and Stella has a room, so now they become roommates. They are temporary roommates who have slept together, so there's a lot of good chemistry still between them. They both say that they're bad at relationships, so they try to keep their own relationship sex only, but I just didn't really love the way that this played out. It was okay, kind of fun, but definitely not as good as the rest of the series. And then book 5 was Rate a Date, which I gave 4 stars to. It's like a dating app romance. The hero, Mitch, is this famous football player who joins a dating app and he meets the heroine, but he hides his identity from Eleanor, like he doesn't tell her that he is a famous football player. And then they connect and fall in love, and it's really sweet, but of course there is still that drama with him keeping his identity a secret. It's a really light and fun read. I mean, they do fall for each other pretty fast. They meet each other in Vegas where she's there for a bachelorette party, which is for one of the earlier heroines because the whole series is about this girl friend group, and these two fall head over heels. And I mean, yes, it is really predictable, but I still really liked it. Next, I read Virtue and Vanity by Astrid Jane Ray. I was in the mood for a groveling romance, and I have a whole shelf of groveling romances on my TBR on my Kindle shelf, so I decided to give this one a try. It's been on that TBR for quite a while, but I sadly did not like it. I gave it 2 stars. It is very similar to The Unwanted Wife with the whole marriage of convenience, but it is a little different because it doesn't start in the middle of the marriage where the heroine, wants a divorce. It starts from the very beginning with Isabel and Sebastian first meeting, being forced into this marriage, and Isabel just being abused by Sebastian. He is a very cold and cruel hero, mainly because he thinks that Isabel is up to no good. He thinks she's nothing but a gold digger, so he treats her like trash, but he is quite the trash hero. I hated him, especially after he hit Isabel. I was like, what am I reading? I just didn't understand his motivations. I mean, yes, he thought she was a gold digger, but being around her, she is constantly crying and terrified of him, like she's cowering from him, and I just didn't see how he didn't get that. He just, for some reason, thought all of that was her pretending to cry, pretending to be scared of him. But yeah, it was kind of awful to read, and then of course he does realize that she is not pretending, that she did get forced into this marriage against her will, and that's when the groveling starts. But by then I was just pretty done with his character. I just didn't care anymore. Didn't really care about his groveling, which was saying something. So he just ruined the book for me. I ended up reading a TL Swan book. I read her newest release, The Casanova, which is book 3 in her Miles High Club series, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I definitely don't love it as much as so many other people do. I gave the first 2 books 3 stars, and this one I also gave another 3 stars, even though I had some high expectations for it because the blurb sounded so good. It sounded like it was gonna be like the main characters would meet on a dating app and fall in love there. Even while they hate each other in real life, it's an office enemies to lovers romance, but I did not get what was promised in this blurb. The whole dating app thing had almost no effect on the romance or the story at all, so that was really disappointing. And I was also so annoyed that the only reason that Elliot even starts to notice Kate is because she gets a makeover. Like, she's now hot, which is why he starts to notice her. And I also didn't really understand why he hated her so much, because she was really good at her job. And after reading this book, I've come to realize that I don't think this author's writing is for me, because every time I read the dialogue, I was cringing because it just didn't feel natural. I kept thinking, like, no one talks like this. Surprisingly though, I didn't have a problem with the ending like a lot of other people did. Like, I was looking at reviews and people hated what happened at the end, which I do understand. Elliot kind of goes chasing after another woman, which is not that great, but I didn't hate it. Overall though, I gave it 3 stars. It does sound like I hated it, but I did not. It was okay. There is some groveling at the end of the book from the hero, which is always nice to read, but I just do not seem to love the series as much as everyone else does. I read Beneath the Wreckage by Catherine Cowles, which is a small town romantic suspense. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It's book 5 in the Wreck series, but reads totally fine as a standalone. The heroine, Piper, she returns to the small town that she used to go to all the time growing up, but she stopped since the death of her best friend who she went to this small town with. Now she's trying to build a life for herself, trying to rebuild this resort. This is when she meets Hunter, who has experienced a similar loss, so they connect over their grief. So the romance is really sweet and emotional. I really liked how protective Hunter is, because there's someone out to get Piper in a resort trying to shut her down. So there's some suspense and mystery with that aspect. There's a good balance of both romance and suspense. So if you like those two things plus small towns, you'll probably really enjoy this book and the rest of the series. I read another highly anticipated read, which was Archangel's Light by Nalini Singh. I can't really decide on my rating, but I'm between a 3.5 and 4 stars. Like, I liked it, but I did have some issues. It is book 14 in the Guild Hunter series, and it's the first MM romance in the series. We are getting Ilium and Aiden's romance. They have been 2 secondary characters throughout the whole series. They are best friends. They've been best friends since they were children and for 500 years. They're both angels. They're part of Raphael's 7, and their romance doesn't really happen until 90% into the book. I don't even know if you can call this a slow burn romance, because the first 90% there is no romance. It's just Ilium and Aiden, or Auden. I don't really know how to pronounce his name. It could also be Add-on. I'm 14 books into the series and I still don't know. So it's these two in China trying to help the Archangel of China rebuild her country, her city. It's a friends to lovers romance with a very heavy emphasis on the friends part, and all the past chapters were so adorable because we get to see Ilium and Add-on growing up as baby angels. We also get to learn all about their pasts, which have been teased throughout the series. But yeah, I did like this one, even though I'm pretty disappointed by how little romance we get. The first half of the book is pretty slow, but it does pick up in the second half, and I mean, I still liked it. I like being back in this world, and when we do finally get the romance, it is so sweet. There is no steam though, just FYI. I read a smutty novella next just because I needed some smut in my life. I read the new Jessa Kane book from September, Coaxing the Roughneck. Her last few ones have been misses for me, but this one I really liked. I gave it 4 stars. It's another insta-love novella with an age gap, older hero who becomes obsessed with the heroine. He lives down in the oil rig that she has just inherited, and she's trying to coax him out so that she can sell it, and obviously she uses her body to coax him out. I read an Eloisa James book. I read Wild Child, which is book 6 in the Wilds of Lindo Castle series, and I think this might be the last one. I do enjoy the series. It's not amazing or anything, but I do like most of the books in the series. But this one was one of the weaker ones. I gave it 3 stars. It's not bad, but I did feel a little bored with it. I did struggle a bit to connect with Joan and Thaddeus. Thaddeus is our Viscount hero who needs to marry someone proper, someone from a good lineage, who is not Joan, because she is the total opposite of that. Everyone in society thinks that Joan is a bastard, and she wants nothing but to be able to perform in theaters. So she really wants to play male characters in the theater, be able to wear pants like the girl on this cover. So she decides to join this traveling theater, and when Thaddeus finds out, even though he doesn't really like her, he decides to become her protector, and in exchange she'll allow him to choose choose the guy that she'll marry. It is fun to read, nothing too dramatic and over the top, but it wasn't all that exciting either. Thaddeus and Joan were nice characters, but I just didn't love them. I read my book club's read, the Ravished by Romance September book, which was Sin and Ink by Naima Simone. It was my first time reading Naima Simone and I really liked it. I really liked her writing, I liked her steam, so I give this one 4 stars. It is a very hot forbidden romance between a former MMA fighter who is now a tattoo artist. He owns a tattoo shop and the heroine is his late brother's widow. Eden also does work with Knox at the tattoo shop, so it's kind of a work romance. So these two have been lusting over each other for a while. Knox especially, like since the first time that he saw her, he's wanted her, but then his brother kind of got to her first, so he has backed off. But the chemistry is just too hot between them and they do finally fall into bed and it is so hot. There's a lot of good angst and tension between these two and I did like the romance, but the plot outside of it could have been better. There were just some things that were left unfinished or could have been developed more, like Knox's mother, his awful mother, that if we got a little bit more of that, this book probably could have been a 5-star read for me because I did really like the writing and the characters, but it was still a really good romance, forbidden, steamy, and really quick to read. I read a historical romance next. I read A Rogue of One's Own by Evie Dunmore. I really loved her debut, Bringing Down the Duke. That one was a 5-star read for me, but this one sadly was pretty big letdown. I'm giving it 2.5 stars. The romance was okay. I didn't really feel the chemistry between Lucy and Tristan, and I didn't really like Tristan as a hero. His character was just not working for me. He's the epitome of this boy who picks on a girl because he has a crush on her, and it just wasn't fun to read. The book also moves at a really slow pace. Lucy is doing her feminist suffragist thing, trying to get this publishing house in order to go against Parliament, and Tristan is the only guy who's getting in the way of that. But I just took so long to even get invested in this story. I didn't really care too much about it. I am just so sad I didn't love this one as much as book 1, but a lot of people seem to really love book 3. They told me that they love book 3, so I might still read it even though I won't have too high hopes for it. I binged on another series, this time a mafia romance series. I read the Deception series by Rina Kent. Book 1 is Vow of Deception, book 2 is Tempted by Deception, and book 3 is Consumed by Deception. I gave all the books 3 stars. It was a very okay read for me. I definitely did not fall in love with it. I did try to read one of Rina Kent's bully romances a long time ago, but I didn't even rate it on Goodreads because I just skimmed through most of it. I didn't really like it, but it was a bully romance, so I didn't expect to. But then I saw this mafia romance release and I saw a lot of people really like it, so I had to give it a try. I really wanted to love them. I mean, the concept sounded really good. It's a mafia romance with a fake marriage. The heroine, Winter, is this homeless girl who gets picked up by the Russian mafia boss hero who forces her to play the role of his dead wife. Winter looks exactly like his dead wife and no one knows that she died, so now she has to take her place. It all sounded really good and I did like Winter. I like the way that she fell not just for Adrian but also his son, but I just did not get anything from Adrian. Like, there's the kind of cold hero who is soft just for the heroine, and there's also the kind of cold hero where you get nothing from him, and he was definitely the latter for me. I just did not feel his love for Winter, and the sex was not the best for me. It's a little cringy because they're into the punishment kink, which I just did not like. It's not like an intense BDSM book or anything, but the punishment king I was not into. The mafia part was good, though I do wish we got more chapters in Adrian's point of view. That probably would have helped me feel more about his character, but it was just an okay mafia romance series. Didn't love it, didn't hate it. I read some more mafia romances next, this time by Katrina Jackson. I read 2 books in the Family series, the prequel novella and the first full-length book. The novella is called Beautiful and Dirty. This one is a really quick read about an older Italian mafia boss and the American who shows up in his Italian restaurant, and they fall head over heels for each other. It's quick and short and hot, but of course there's an end date with her having to go back home to the US. It does end on a cliffhanger, which I was not expecting, with a surprise something. I don't really want to spoil it, but it does end with a surprise. And Sal and Shay's book is still not out yet. Their book isn't until book 3 in the series, and book 2 only just released. But I still really like this one. I give it 4 stars. And the first full-length book is The Hitman, which is about Shay's cousin and one of Sal's mafia guys. Zara has just been publicly humiliated by her fiance, who was caught cheating on the night before their wedding. So she goes to Italy to go on the honeymoon. She was supposed to be with her new husband. Instead, she steals his credit cards to spend in Italy, which I thought was great because the girl deserved it. And during her single honeymoon, that's when she meets Giulio, who is part of the mafia. He's this gorgeous Italian man, and there's some good push and pull between them, and they do fall into bed, and it's really hot, very steamy. But then Zara unintentionally is pulled into the mafia world, and Giulio has to protect her. They hide away in the middle of nowhere, and this is kind of when things stalled a bit. It got a little boring to read. Nothing was really happening at this point, but things do pick up again later. It surprisingly is really sweet for a mafia romance. It doesn't get too dark or anything like that. There is some violence, but Giulio is just a really sweet hero. He is so good to Zara. I gave this one 4 stars. I did really like it. So if you're a fan of mafia romances that aren't too dark, you should definitely read this series. I read another Christmas romance next. This one is a Christmas novella called American Christmas by Adriana Herrera. This is book 4.5 in the Dreamer series, and you probably should read this one after the first 4 books. I love the series, but it had been a while since I last read it, so I did not remember these 2 characters. They were side characters though, so I didn't really feel too bad about it. It's like an Christmas retelling of the gift of the Magi. So they both buy presents for each other, but things do get messed up along the way. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It's a really cute Christmas novella. I didn't really love the main characters, but I did love seeing the previous characters from the rest of the series. And the last historical romance that I read in September was When the Earl Met His Match by Stacey Reed. This was so good. I gave it 4 stars. It's book 4 in the Wedded by Scandal series about the sister from book 3 who ran away to get married. It's surprisingly sweet for a Stacey Reed historical romance. Usually she writes more angsty stuff, but this one was adorable. It's still steamy though, since it is Stacey Reed, but I did love that it started off like an epistolary romance. Hugh, who is our Earl hero, he's mute, and he puts up an ad looking for a wife, and Phoebe responds, but in a way where she's like, what kind of ad is this? So she blasts him, and then they continue corresponding, and it's really adorable. But then she ends up getting pregnant by another man who betrayed her, wants nothing to do with her, so she decides to accept this marriage of convenience with Hugh. Hugh is also a single father, which is another reason why he wants a wife, and it's a very, very sweet romance, a little slow. They get to know each other, learn how to communicate with each other, and I just really, really like this historical romance. My next read was First Love Take 2 by Sajni Patel, which I loved. I gave it 5 stars. I listened to it in audio, and it was just so, so good. I really like Sajni Patel's debut, The Trouble with Hating You, and this one is like a standalone sequel. It's a second chance romance that is emotional and angsty, and it's got the roommates trope. So 2 exes have to live with each other, not just in the same apartment, but the same room, and they do have to share a bed. I loved Preeti and Daniel. Their second chance romance is so sweet, lots of pining. It does move at a fairly slow pace, like the romance, but I did like the way that it played out. So Preeti is finishing up her residency, about to become a doctor, but she's dealing with a lot of anxiety, and it doesn't help that she reunites with the ex whose heart that she broke. She broke it off years ago because her family, her extended family, didn't like him, and his family didn't like her. But now they're back together in the same room, and you can still feel the love between them. I will say the book does deal with some pretty heavy topics like mental illness and racism that does kind of take over the romance sometimes, but I didn't really have a problem with that. I like the way that the author handled these topics, and Daniel as a hero was so freaking sweet. He is so nice, so supportive, even though she broke his heart. He helps her a lot with her anxiety, and he's just so, so wonderful. I loved him. It was just a very wonderful, heartwarming second chance romance that totally worked for me. And the final book that I read in September was The Inn on Sweetbriar Lane by Jeannie Chin. I gave it 4 stars. It's a very solid small town romance with a heroine who owns a bed and breakfast, and the hero moves in next door to open up a bar. June and Clay do not get along at first, mainly because Clay is the grumpiest Grump. He is an ex-soldier who is very prickly and wants nothing to do with June, but they are forced to work together in order to bring in business, and they also need to work together to make the town pumpkin festival successful. So it's a perfect fall read. It does take place in the fall. There's this whole festival, and I did recently recommend it in my fall romances video. The romance is great. I love June's family. It's like a family-owned bed and breakfast. It gets a little emotional at times, but it is very feel-good, and I did love seeing diversity in a small town romance. Those were all the books that I read back in September. Let me know your thoughts if you read any of them. It was a fairly good reading month, even though there were some disappointments. As always, all the books that I mentioned will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!